300 million years ago, the sky belonged to a monster. With a wingspan of nearly a meter, it ruled with absolute terror. Meganeura was the largest flying insect to ever exist on Earth. It possessed compound eyes that could detect the slightest movement below, and a hunting success rate that rivals any apex predator today. It snatches its prey mid-air, crushing it with razor-sharp mandibles. There was no escape, no place to hide in this ancient empire. But the sky was only half of this terrifying, overgrown world. Down in the rotting undergrowth, a different kind of titan reigned. A colossal armored creature stretching over 2.5 meters. Arthropleura was a biological tank clad in an impenetrable chitin shell. Moving with hundreds of synchronized legs, it feared absolutely nothing. These two giants were the absolute masters of the Carboniferous period. They evolved to conquer a planet perfectly built for their survival. A world where the impossible became not just possible, but dominant. To understand their absolute dominance, we must look at the air. This was an era of hyperoxygenation, a factory of extreme life. Endless wetland forests pumped staggering amounts of oxygen into the sky, pushing global oxygen levels to a terrifying 35%. Compared to the 21% we breathe today, this was explosive. If a modern human were to step into this ancient, heavy atmosphere, the highly toxic oxygen concentration would cause instant organ failure. But for the insects of this era, this toxic air was pure fuel. It flowed into their bodies, supercharging every muscle and cell, allowing them to shatter the normal biological boundaries of size. They absorbed the excess energy like living, armored batteries. A perfect biological machine built for a perfectly oxygenated world. And no creature took advantage of this more than Arthropleura, a 50-kilogram titan that functioned as the forest's apex scavenger. It spent its entire life consuming the endless carpet of dead vegetation. Its armor was virtually impenetrable to any threat of its time. Even early amphibians, the ancestors of all modern reptiles, kept away. It moved with a relentless mechanical rhythm across the mud. Every segment of its body was a masterpiece of prehistoric engineering, designed to protect it from the treacherous terrain of the swamp. With hundreds of legs gripping the slippery, algae-covered roots, it was a master navigator of a world that was constantly sinking. But this perfectly adapted body hid a dangerous secret, a vulnerability hardwired into its very genetic code. Because insects do not possess lungs like mammals or modern reptiles, they rely on an entirely different system to breathe, a passive network of tubes called the tracheal system. Oxygen must physically diffuse from the outside air into their cells. This means their maximum possible size is dictated by the atmosphere. They were prisoners to the very air that made them giants. As long as the oxygen remained at 35%, they thrived. But the Carboniferous was a highly unstable, volatile environment. The extreme oxygen levels made everything incredibly flammable. Even a tiny spark from a rock slide could ignite the damp forest. When lightning struck, it didn't just burn a tree. It caused an explosion. Wildfires in the Carboniferous were apocalyptic events. Flames burned hotter, faster, and consumed everything in their path. For the giant insects, these fires were the ultimate test of survival. Meganeura could easily outfly the advancing wall of flames, using its incredible aerial agility to escape the thick, choking smoke. But for the slow, massive Arthropleura, escape was much harder. It had to rely on its thick chitin armor to shield it from the searing heat, burrowing deep into the wet, sucking mud of the swamp floor, waiting in the dark while the world above burned to ash. These fires were devastating, but they were also a natural reset. When the smoke finally cleared, a strange phenomenon was revealed. The burned and fallen trees did not rot away into the soil. In modern times, a fallen tree decays rapidly, returning to the earth. But during the Carboniferous, bacteria had not yet evolved to eat wood. Specifically, they could not break down a tough polymer called lignin. Lignin was the structural armor of the prehistoric scale trees. Because it couldn't decay, dead wood simply piled up for millions of years, layer upon layer of fallen giants, compressing under their own weight. This massive accumulation of undecayed carbon is what gave this era its name. The Carboniferous, the coal-bearing age that powers our modern world. This perfectly preserved carbon trap is what kept oxygen levels so dangerously high. As long as the wood didn't rot, the oxygen stayed in the air. and the giant insects remained the undisputed kings of the Earth. But nature abhors a vacuum, and evolution is always searching for a key. Deep in the shadows of the undecayed logs, a microscopic mutation was about to change the planet forever. It started not with a roar but with absolute microscopic silence. A single tiny fungal spore drifting through the hyperoxygenated air, landing softly on the hardened, lignin-rich bark of a fallen lepidodendron. For millions of years, these spores would simply die on the tough wood. But this time, a random genetic mutation provided a new biological tool, an enzyme capable of doing what no other organism on Earth could do. It could break down the unbreakable fortress of lignin. The first white rot fungi had been born. Slowly, imperceptibly, the fungal hyphae began to penetrate the dead wood, dissolving the rigid structures into a soft, pale, fibrous mush. It was a microscopic revolution that would scale up to apocalyptic proportions. Because this forest wasn't just a few dead trees. It was a continuous global graveyard of undecayed carbon. A planetary-scale buffet entirely untouched, waiting to be consumed. And the fungi began to feast with terrifying exponential speed. At first, the giant insects of the swamp noticed absolutely nothing. Meganeura continued to dominate the foggy skies above the canopy, executing high-speed aerial maneuvers to hunt smaller prey, its massive flight muscles demanding a constant massive influx of oxygen. Every rapid beat of its four wings pulled the thick air deep into its spiracles. Down below, Arthropleura continued its endless scavenging march. Oblivious to the pale white patches beginning to bloom on the logs it walked over. But as the fungi consumed the wood, a chemical exchange was happening. The trapped carbon was being broken down and released back into the atmosphere, in the form of a heavy invisible gas, carbon dioxide. For the first time in tens of millions of years, the atmospheric balance was shifting. The endless oxygen factory of the Carboniferous was being thrown in reverse. As the white rot spread, it began to aggressively consume the Earth's oxygen, replacing it with suffocating levels of carbon dioxide. A slow, invisible suffocation was creeping into the pristine swamp. The change was gradual, taking thousands of years to truly manifest. But for a creature at the absolute limit of biological size, even a small drop is lethal. As global oxygen levels ticked down from 35% to 30%, the first signs of biological stress began to appear in the apex predators. Meganeura, once the tireless ruler of the sky, found itself needing to rest more often. The dense air it relied on for both lift and breathing was becoming thinner. High-speed pursuits that used to end in an effortless kill now ended in exhaustion. Its massive tracheal tubes simply could not diffuse enough oxygen to the flight muscles. On the forest floor, Arthropleura's relentless march began to slow. The 50 kilograms of chitin armor, once its greatest strength, felt heavier. Its hundreds of legs moved with less synchronization, less terrifying precision. The massive beast found itself pausing frequently, struggling to pull in air, its spiracles flaring wide open in a desperate attempt to gorge on oxygen. But the oxygen simply wasn't there in the concentrations it required. The giants were slowly being starved of their most critical fuel. Meanwhile, the White Plague was accelerating across the supercontinent. Vast stretches of the dark green swamp were now blanketed in sickly white. Billions of fungal spores clouded the air, making it thick and difficult to breathe. The once pristine water of the swamp turned murky with rotting, dissolved wood. Entire massive lepidodendron trees collapsed not from age but from internal decay, crashing down into the mud and releasing massive bursts of trapped CO2. The sky above the canopy, once bright, was now perpetually grey and oppressive. The greenhouse effect took hold, causing violent shifts in the global climate. Intense, erratic storms battered the already dying ecosystems. Lightning strikes ignited the remaining dry vegetation, but the fires were different now. They smoldered rather than exploded, choked by the rising carbon dioxide. The perfect, stable paradise of the Carboniferous was fracturing, and the creatures perfectly adapted to that paradise were trapped inside it. Evolution had built them to be giants, but left them with a fatal design flaw. They could not shrink fast enough to adapt to the vanishing oxygen. As oxygen levels plunged toward 25%, the crisis became critical. The giant insects were no longer apex predators, they were victims of their own biology. Every movement became a calculated risk, an agonizing expenditure of limited energy. Arthropleura retreated deep into the mud, entering a state of semi-torpor to survive, hoping the air would return, unaware that the planet had permanently changed. Meganeura clung to the high branches, its massive wings twitching uselessly. It could only watch as smaller, more efficient flying insects darted past it, insects that didn't need 35% oxygen to power their tiny bodies. The evolutionary advantage of immense size had instantly become a death sentence. The giants were being outcompeted by creatures a fraction of their size, a tragic irony written into the fossil record of our planet. The rulers of the Earth, brought down not by a cataclysmic asteroid, but by the silent, relentless spread of a microscopic mushroom. The era of the colossal insects was entering its final agonizing death throes. As the oxygen vanished, another group of animals saw their ultimate opportunity to rise. As oxygen levels hit 25%, the balance of power shifted. For millions of years, size was the ultimate advantage. But now it was a massive suffocating liability. The giant insects were starving for air, their movement sluggish and heavy. And in the shadows of the rotting logs, a new kind of animal was watching. Early reptiles, the ancestors of dinosaurs and modern lizards. They were tiny compared to the colossal Arthropleura. But unlike insects, they possessed active muscular lungs. Lungs that could actively pump the thinning air into their bloodstream. This fundamental anatomical difference made them immune to the dropping oxygen. A small reptile darts out from the undergrowth, agile and energetic. It easily outmaneuvers a desperate, gasping prehistoric arachnid. The age of the exoskeleton was slowly giving way to the age of the internal skeleton. For the giant insects, the world was no longer a hunting ground. It had become a terrifying, exhausting gauntlet of survival. Nowhere was this tragedy more evident than in the sky. Meganeura, the apex predator of the air, was grounding itself. The air density had dropped so much that its wings could no longer generate lift. To stay airborne, it had to beat its wings twice as fast. But beating its wings faster required more oxygen, which simply wasn't there. It was a vicious, inescapable biological catch-22. Flight became an exhausting, desperate struggle just to stay above the canopy. A colossal Meganeura launches from a dying fern attempting to hunt. But halfway through the dive, its muscles cramp from hypoxia. The massive insect spirals out of control, crashing violently into the swamp. Its delicate, iridescent wings snap against the thick mud. Down on the ground, the undisputed king of the sky is completely defenseless. Struggling to right itself, it is surrounded by the aggressive white fungi. Even the smallest amphibians now see the fallen giant as a potential meal. The Carboniferous sky was slowly being emptied of its monsters. Driven by an ancient survival instinct, the giants began to migrate. Arthropleura abandoned its usual territories, marching endlessly, searching for pockets of the forest where the air might still be thick. But the white rot plague was everywhere, a global pandemic of decay. The heavy carbon dioxide gas pooled in the lower valleys of the swamp, creating invisible toxic lakes of suffocating air. As Arthropleura descended into these valleys, the air turned deadly, its massive body plowing through the mud, dragging its heavy armor. Dozens of the giant millipedes gathered near the edges of the water, a desperate congregation of starving, suffocating titans, their mandibles twitching as their tracheal tubes fought for every molecule of oxygen. The migration was futile. There was no escape from a changing atmosphere. The entire planet was rebalancing its chemistry at their expense. They were walking blindly into their own mass grave, leaving behind a trail of exhausted, dying behemoths in the mud. As the massive scale trees rotted, they poisoned the water. Millions of tons of dissolved lignin and tannic acid flooded the wetlands. The once clear, shallow pools turned into dark, acidic death traps. Amphibians, the other rulers of the Carboniferous, began to suffer. Their porous skin absorbed the toxins, driving them out of the water. The ecosystem was collapsing from the bottom up. Dead fish and smaller aquatic creatures floated to the surface, providing a temporary feast for the starving scavengers. But even eating required energy, and energy required oxygen. A massive Arthropleura attempts to feed on a dead amphibian, but halfway through the meal, it simply stops. Its internal organs failing as hypoxia sets in. The giant insect freezes like a grotesque biological statue, trapped in the mud, slowly being swallowed by the very earth it once ruled. The swamp was no longer a cradle of life, it was an open tomb. The tipping point finally arrived. Global oxygen levels plummeted below 22%. The era of extreme hyperoxygenation was officially over. A thick, suffocating blanket of grey mist permanently covered the forest. The buzzing of giant wings, once the defining sound of the Carboniferous, ceased. A fallen Meganeura lies halfway submerged in the acidic water, its massive, multifaceted eyes losing their iridescent shine, its legs twitching rhythmically in a final futile attempt to move. Nearby, the colossal Arthropleura collapses entirely, its 2.5-meter body resting heavy and lifeless on the rotting logs. The white rot fungi immediately begin to colonize its armor, reclaiming the biological matter for the new fungal-dominated Earth. The absolute masters of the planet had been completely dethroned, not by a faster predator, but by the relentless march of evolution. With the giants dead, their massive bodies sank into the mud. What would become of their colossal remains? The silence that fell over the Carboniferous was absolute. For the first time in millions of years, the sky was still. No giant wings cut through the heavy grey mist. The reign of the giant insects had not ended in a violent cataclysm. It ended with a slow, agonizing whimper in the dark mud. A lone surviving Arthropleura takes its final labored steps. Its massive tracheal tubes have collapsed under the lack of oxygen. Every cell in its 50-kilogram body is screaming for air that isn't there. The creature stops, its heavily armored head sinking into the toxic water. It does not struggle, it simply powers down like a broken machine. Nature is brutally indifferent to the passing of kings. The exoskeleton that made it invincible is now just a heavy coffin. Within hours, the creeping white rot fungi find the carcass. The great recycling of the Earth's biomass continues unabated. The age of the Titans is officially over. As the animals died, a different kind of life form inherited the Earth. The white rot fungi had achieved total global domination. Unchecked by any natural predators, they consumed the dead forests. This was the greatest feast in the history of the planet. Tens of millions of years of undecayed wood finally rotting away. The visual transformation of the swamp was horrifying. Massive towering lepidodendron trees collapsed into white, fibrous mush. The once dark green landscape was now painted in sickly pale hues. Billions of fungal spores clouded the air, choking the remaining sunlight. But this fungal empire was unwittingly destroying its own food source. By breaking down the lignin, they were dismantling the very architecture of the forest. Without the massive scale trees, the endless canopy began to vanish. The humid, enclosed greenhouse environment of the swamp was breaking open, exposing the delicate undergrowth to harsh, erratic weather. The ecosystem was unspooling at terrifying speed. The collapse of the giant plants triggered a horrific chain reaction. Without the massive trees to anchor the soil, catastrophic erosion began. The shallow, stagnant pools of the Carboniferous turned into rivers of toxic sludge. Amphibians, once the undisputed masters of the water, found themselves trapped. Their delicate, porous skin was seared by the highly acidic, tannin-rich water. Mass die-offs of early tetrapods littered the muddy banks, their bodies piling up alongside the decaying husks of the giant insects. The Earth was experiencing a profound, suffocating mass extinction. Carbon dioxide levels continued to spike, trapping heat in the atmosphere. The climate swung violently from hyperhumid to devastatingly dry. The great swamps, which had covered the globe for 60 million years, began to shrink, retreating toward the equator, leaving behind vast barren wastelands. A world that was once teeming with colossal life was now a graveyard. A stark reminder that no species, no matter how powerful, is permanent. Evolution is a ruthless judge, and the verdict had been delivered. Beneath the devastation, a deeper geological process was halting. For millions of years, the undecayed wood had been sinking into the mud, trapping unimaginable amounts of carbon beneath the Earth's crust. Under intense heat and pressure, this organic matter was slowly cooking, transforming into the massive coal beds that power our modern civilization. Every piece of coal burned today is the fossilized remains of this lost world, the trapped energy of a time when insects were the size of eagles. But the evolution of the white rot fungi changed everything. By digesting the dead wood, the fungi stopped the accumulation of carbon. They broke the cycle that was creating the coal. If this microscopic fungus had evolved just 50 million years earlier, the vast coal reserves of the Industrial Revolution would never have existed. Human history, as we know it, would have been completely impossible. We owe our modern technological world to a biological delay, a temporary glitch in evolution that allowed the trees to pile up. As the Carboniferous period drew to a brutal choking close, the giant insects were dead and the massive amphibians were dying. But in the ruins of the Great Swamp, a tiny survivor was thriving. The early reptiles were small, scaly, and deeply insignificant. But they possessed two massive evolutionary advantages. First, their active lungs allowed them to breathe the thinning air with ease. And second, they had evolved a biological miracle, the amniotic egg. Unlike amphibians, which had to lay their soft eggs in the toxic water, reptiles laid eggs with a hard, leathery shell, a self-contained life support system that could survive on dry land. This meant they were no longer chained to the dying swamps. As the climate dried out, these small reptiles simply walked away, leaving the rotting, toxic wetlands behind to conquer the dry interior. The death of the giant insects had cleared the stage for a new dynasty. The age of bugs was over. Out of their ashes, the age of the dinosaurs was about to begin. The bodies of the colossal insects did not simply vanish. As they sank into the deep, anoxic mud of the dying swamp, they were buried under millions of tons of sediment and rotting plant matter, protected from scavengers and the ravages of the changing climate. Over immense spans of geological time, the heat and pressure of the Earth began to chemically alter their chitinous armor and the surrounding wood, slowly baking the organic material into solid rock. Their massive forms were flattened, their delicate wings pressed into shale, creating perfect black carbon silhouettes trapped in time. These fossils are the only reason we know these monsters ever existed. When paleontologists first cracked open the coal seams of Europe, they discovered wingspans the size of hawks, preserved in astonishing detail. A ghost of a lost world staring back from the darkness. A world where the rules of biology were vastly different. A world powered by an atmosphere we can barely comprehend. But the lineage of these creatures did not die entirely. As the oxygen levels plummeted and stabilized near 21%, the surviving insects were forced to adapt to the new, thinner air. Evolution selected strictly for smaller, more efficient bodies. Bodies that required a fraction of the oxygen to function. Over 300 million years, the terrifying Meganeura shrank into the delicate, beautiful dragonflies that dart over our ponds today. Their wingspan reduced from 70 centimeters to a mere few inches. And the unstoppable, armored behemoth Arthropleura faded into the small millipedes hiding under logs in our forests. They still breathe through the exact same passive, tracheal tubes, but those tubes are now small, efficient, and perfectly adapted to a world that no longer supports biological titans. They are the living shadows of a forgotten empire, tiny echoes of a time when they ruled the planet. This dramatic shrinking has led scientists to a fascinating question. A question that sounds like the plot of a science fiction movie. What if the Earth's oxygen levels were to suddenly rise again? What if the atmosphere spiked back up to 35%? Would the insects of today rapidly evolve back into giants? In laboratory experiments, insects raised in hyper-oxygenated environments actually do grow significantly larger and heavier than normal. Their passive tracheal systems eagerly absorb the excess fuel. But there is a catch. The world has changed fundamentally. Even with massive amounts of oxygen, they could never reclaim the sky. Because today, the skies are guarded by highly advanced predators. Birds and bats, with their highly efficient active lungs and warm blood, would easily outmaneuver and consume any slow-growing giant insect. The ecological niche for a monster bug has been permanently closed. The Carboniferous was a one-time, perfect storm of evolution. Yet, the legacy of the Carboniferous period shapes our lives every single day. When the white rot fungi finally learned to digest wood, they closed the planetary carbon trap forever. But the billions of tons of wood that had already been buried remained locked in the Earth's crust as vast deposits of coal. When human civilization discovered this buried, concentrated energy, we ignited the Industrial Revolution. Every steam engine, every factory, every massive power plant was fueled by the fossilized remains of the Carboniferous swamp. When you burn a piece of coal today, you are literally burning a 300-million-year-old tree, releasing the ancient sunlight that was trapped in its leaves. We are currently returning that trapped carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, reversing the chemical process that created the giant insects. And in doing so, we are rapidly changing the climate of the entire planet. The fall of the prehistoric giant insects is a profound cautionary tale. It reminds us that absolute dominance is often an illusion, built on the fragile, razor-thin balance of a specific environment. When the atmosphere shifted, the armor of Arthropleura was useless. The wings of Meganeura became nothing more than a heavy burden. They were prisoners of their own highly specialized biology, destroyed not by a meteor but by a microscopic fungus. As we look back at the monsters of the Carboniferous, we must ask ourselves about the fragility of our own empire. If you want to uncover more lost worlds and prehistoric mysteries, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. What do you think was the most terrifying creature of the Ice Age? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. Check out the video on screen now to explore the age of the mammoths. Thank you for watching Survival Geography. We will see you in the next era.